Good morning, I'm Dave Christie with your LaRouche organization update for Friday, July 11th. Now, tomorrow in Berlin, Saturday, Helga LaRouche, the founder of the Schiller Institute, will keynote a crucial conference entitled Man is Not a Wolf to Man for a New Paradigm in International Relations. Now, she and other diplomats and leading figures from around the world will convene this conference to discuss the needed policies and principles, the ideas for statecraft and culture to get us, humanity, out of the morass that we are presently stuck in, accelerating at a dangerous course towards war and economic breakdown. This conference will also be should be seen in stark contrast to some of the leading developments that I'm going to cover today, one of which is the nuclear pact between France and the United Kingdom, certainly to be designed as sort of a tripwire to draw the United States into continued confrontation with Russia and really the broader alliance that Russia is participating in, including the BRICS, what's called the BRICS Plus at this point. But the other aspect that I want to cover is the important dialogue that occurred between Secretary of State Marco Rubio and Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov of Russia. That happened in Malaysia. Perhaps the most important thing is that it occurred. We'll cover some of what was at least discussed publicly around that. So I'll come to that, but just to start with, if you are not in Berlin and planning to attend the event live tomorrow, the Schiller Institute conference, early birds can tune in at around 4 a.m. That's East Coast time. It will be beginning at 9 o'clock Central European time. But you're going to see, if you can't tune in live, you can catch the videos. They'll be available on the schillerinstitute.com website. You can also find the RSVP link to participate live via Zoom, but you can catch either some of the panels on Saturday or Sunday. The conference will go through the weekend. There's presently a roster of around 34 presentations over the 2 days. There will be a concert as well. 10 different nations will be represented by the speakers. The opening panel, titled Cooperation Between the BRICS and Europe to Implement the Oasis Plan and the Agenda 2063 for Africa. This will address the development program, particularly that of the Oasis Plan, but the broader array of development policies that Lyndon and Helga LaRouche have developed over many decades. So now the other point, just to make this clear, the 109th consecutive meetings of the International Peace Coalition, the 110th would have occurred today. However, that is actually going to be incorporated into the conference tomorrow. So if you are an attendee of the International Peace Conference or Coalition meeting, tune in tomorrow. Okay, now back to some of the leading developments. As I mentioned, the UK and France have unveiled a new nuclear weapons pact. This is said to coordinate their nuclear arsenals more closely, citing, of course, what they see as the heightened threats to security in Europe. As you can expect, Moscow has seen this as an overtly anti-Russian policy, going on to say they'll factor this agreement into its military planning. The two governments in a joint statement yesterday said that that the British and French nuclear weapons are aimed at protecting the two nations' vital interests. So for all of you citizens of those nations, they're out to defend your vital interests. But they added that our nuclear forces are independent, but can be coordinated and contribute significantly to the overall security of the alliance, referring to the NATO alliance. For his part, where he was speaking alongside of Emmanuel Macron of France, Prime Minister Keir Starmer of the UK hailed this, it's called the Northward Declaration, saying that NATO adversaries, warning them that they will know that any extreme threat to this continent would prompt a response from our two nations. Whereas Macron described the pact as a message that our partners and adversaries must hear. He also rejected suggestions that the pact was linked to the plans for the coalition of the willing, or the coalition of the brain dead, really, which is supposedly going to go into Ukraine after a ceasefire with Russia. Anyway, as could be expected, the Russians have responded. Russian Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Ryabkov basically said that this was part of the anti-Russian canvas of NATO policy. He said, we will take this into account not only politically, but also in our military planning. And now recall that back in March, Macron had proposed a idea of extending France's nuclear umbrella over the entirety of Europe. The foreign ministry of Russia blasted that at that time, saying that this was a kind of nuclear blackmail, saying that France was eager to become the nuclear patron saint of Europe. So this is a further iteration of this insane idea. Similar insane proposals have come out of Germany saying that they should start pursuing their own nuclear weapons program. So you see the kind of fevered grip in light of the collapse of the military capabilities of NATO countries. Now, I just want to address a couple things. Number one, they said this is in the vital interests of the citizens of France, of England, Scotland, others of the United Kingdom. I'm sure that if you're living in those nations, you heartily disagree with your leadership, given that this has nothing to do with national interests. This is only to do with the potential end of human civilization. But what do you expect, given that, the UK has its own deep state centered in the city of London. France has the ancient legacy of the synarchist forces that brought us working with the British monarchy and intelligence services, brought us the fascist forces that led to the last World War. The second point on this is, this nuclear alliance, apparently the UK has somewhere around 225 warheads. France is supposedly around 290. How are you going to take on Russia with whatever it is, 5,000 to 6,000 nuclear warheads? You're looking at about 10% of the combined forces of the UK and the French. The answer is well, first off, any launch of any weapon likely triggers a cascade where all weapons on the planet get unleashed. So this is hardly any sort of defensive capability. But the second thing is this is yet another attempt by the forces of NATO that see the potential withdrawal of the U.S., given the failures of the proxy war that have ongoing in Ukraine, the potential of the U.S. to withdraw from NATO, whether that's formally or just simply backing off of the engagements in the various proxy wars, obviously with Ukraine as the front runner of that. But I want to make one point that this is also part of this kind of tripwire concept, that, this is the type of nuclear saber rattling that we're seeing from these collapsing and defunct imperial policies represented by Paris and the city of London. And that they certainly will sabotage or attempt to sabotage the negotiations between the largest thermonuclear powers, that is Russia and the United States. But I think, you also have to see all of this in the context of psychological warfare, something that Mr. LaRouche has discussed, the concept of the relationship between nuclear warfare and psychological warfare. I want to read this quote from Mr. LaRouche from all the way back in 1974. This was in a piece titled "The Rockefellers' Fascism with a Democratic Face." And under the subsection of psychological warfare, LaRouche in this piece asserts, the uninformed man in the street mistakenly believes that contemporary U.S. military strategy is obviously premised on the techniques for delivering and targeting thermonuclear missiles. Thermonuclear warfare capability is, in fact, a very high order of secondary consideration in present imperialist strategic doctrine. But for reasons which ought to be obvious, it is not and could not be the most fundamental aspect of that doctrine. The cornerstone of all contemporary imperialist strategic doctrine, including thermonuclear doctrine, is psychological warfare. It could not be otherwise. So that may be a challenge for people, but I think you got to look at a lot of the posturing around nuclear warfare as a subset of the broader perspective of psychological warfare to keep everybody in the confrontational, battle of the old Iron Curtain policy. Now, the insanity of nuclear weapons can't be dismissed, especially given the demilitarization of NATO. That's certainly occurred on the battlefields of the proxy war in Ukraine, but is really a outgrowth of the deindustrialization policy of the NATO countries. But keeping this belligerent tone, given that deindustrialization, certainly leaves not many other options but nuclear weapons when you're trying to take on Russia and China. The other part of this is, I think it's integrated into the kind of hybrid warfare policy that we've seen, where under deindustrialization we've pursued more of the kind of regime change, covert ops by special forces aligned with the military, the intelligence agencies, JSOC and SAS on the military side of things, aligning itself with MI6 and CIA. This is the kind of covert operations we've seen. We also saw this recently in the spider's web, where the nominally Ukrainian forces recruited assets inside of Russia to launch the drone attack that we saw on Russian strategic bombers. Weeks later, that same format was used in the Israeli decapitation strike in Iran. Military leadership, scientists were targeted, and then of course there were drones with different terrorist networks recruited to take out air defense system using drones. This is part of what's called the synergistic warfare these days. But it leads to this second matter I want to address, which is this meeting on the sidelines of the ASEAN between Secretary of State and, I guess, National Security Advisor. He's sort of doing the dual hat redo of Kissinger. Anyway, Marco Rubio met with Foreign Minister Lavrov on the sidelines of the ASEAN yesterday. We don't know the extent of their discussions, but it's relevant that it even happened, and is in light of the attempt by the U.S. and Russia to reestablish basic diplomatic ties, including consulates and embassies and all of this. But recall that that these meetings to restore diplomatic ties were called off by the U.S. on the Monday after the Thursday, June 12th attack on Iran. That is the Israeli attack on Iran. That Monday was also the day, that Monday was also the day after the talks in Oman were supposed to have occurred between the United States and Iran around its nuclear program. So the fact that the meeting between Lavrov and Rubio happened in Malaysia is important. That could be a resumption of that process. The Russian Foreign Ministry referred to them as substantive and frank. That's usually a code word for a row, a fight over issues. They discussed, according to the Russian Foreign Ministry, Ukraine, the situation in Iran and Syria, other issues as well. Rubio said something about concerning the idea of peace in Ukraine. He talked about a new and different approach. I won't characterize as something as guarantees peace, but it's a concept that I'll take back to the president. So that's from Rubio. So obviously, all the concepts of negotiations and so on, we have a broke down diplomatic process. One possible, at least a point that could be worked on between the United States and Russia is the Iranian nuclear program. Now, yesterday, Russian Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Ryabkov told Sputnik that Russia was interested in collaborating with the United States, the IAEA, and Iran to deal with the matters around the Iranian nuclear program, essentially saying that, they could deal with the enriched uranium, but guarantee the peaceful right to civilian nuclear program. Ryabkov said that there's nothing formal moving on this process, but recall that Donald Trump said that in prior discussions with Vladimir Putin that he was open to the idea of Putin helping on the Iran situation. So we'll see where this goes, but given the erratic behavior from the Trump administration, we don't know what the state of negotiations are right now. One thing is to be sure, none of these issues can be solved piecemeal. It has to be resolved from a fundamental overhaul of the entire global system of international relations. What Helga has called for consistently for a new international development and security architecture where the development of all nations is allowed to take place in a sovereign way, and their security is defended, and their sovereignty defended overall. So that will be what's taken up at the Schiller Institute conference in Berlin tomorrow and over the course of the weekend. So tune into that conference. Stay tuned to the LaRouche organization and go to the EIR Daily Alert for your updates and become a subscriber. So stay tuned and enjoy.